Hello and welcome to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed, the podcast where you get quick, practical information about a hot topic. In the time it takes to make a cup of coffee, you'll gain insights on hot topics and pressing HR issues. I'm your host, Rebecca Jacobs, and we are so glad you're here. Before we start, here's my usual disclaimer that the podcast is general information only and does not contain any legal advice. Now it's time to dive in. Hello, for today's podcast, what we're going to talk about is the two most basic principles to achieve HR compliance. Now, by way of background, I was an adjunct lecturer at The Ohio State University's Fisher College of Business for 16 years. I taught employment law to students getting their master's in human resources. I had students from all across the spectrum. I had some who were coming straight through college and had no work experience. I had some non-traditional students who were in their 30s or 40s who were coming to class after having a robust career or possibly even coming from the HR field wanting to get a master's. So I always had to find a way to explain my material to them and explain the employment law concepts in a way that they would understand. And over time, I realized that a lot of what I was teaching them were things that they were not going to have memorized, obviously. They're not going to memorize the full Family Medical Leave Act. They're not going to have Title VII memorized, but they're going to remember key points. They're going to know which red flags to look for. And I thought I need to embed in my materials a very basic, easy to remember rule of thumb for them that they can always rely on and that will get them close to the finish line on most compliance issues. So what I came up with was I told them that 90% of HR compliance can be achieved by two simple actions. And I told them at the beginning of class, my very, very first 5 minutes in front of them at the beginning of the semester, I said, here are the two things. When you're sitting in your office or your cubicle 20 or 30 years from now and try and remember what the heck you learned in the employment law class with Professor Jacobs, that if nothing else, if you don't remember anything else, you remember these two things, and it is document everything and consistency. And I would go back to that at the very end of class, and I would end my class, end the semester with that same thing, and also a lawyer joke because those are funny. Anyhow, so I want to dive into these just a little bit and flesh it out a little bit. Now, when we document, we're talking about who, what, when, where, how. And we want to have some way of finding out, recreating conversations that were had with employees that are important, performance management issues that came up and were resolved, coaching issues, complaints about other employees' behavior, complaints about misconduct. We want to have everything documented so we can go back and see everything. But also, very critically, remember, and I do come from a litigation background, juries love fairness. They want to know that if someone was having a performance issue or a behavior issue, they want to know that someone talked to them about it and someone gave them a chance to adjust their behavior. Now, if it's like a really horrendous piece of misconduct that there's no remediation for, and that's in those circumstances, that's different. But if someone is having issues with being late or having issues with cleaning up their workstation, we want to have some documentation that someone talked to them about it. And it can be as simple as, and I've told this in many, many training classes and with my students, I would tell them your documentation can be as simple as you sending yourself an email. You've had the conversation with the employee, you're walking away, you pull out your phone, you send yourself an email that says, I just spoke with John about X, Y, and Z, and he says he's going to do better next time. Now, by sending yourself an email, not only do you have it in your inbox, and you can put it in whatever file folders or however you sort things and store things in your email, but also think about it, it's automatically time and date stamping that documentation and indicating who it's from. You have all of that great metadata that if you end up in litigation, your lawyer is going to love that kind of thing. So it can be very, very simple. Also, make sure that if you have documentation that is not an email, that you have something that indicates, like if it's a written note, something that indicates that you were the one who wrote it or the manager, whoever wrote it. We in a litigation case a long time ago, we could not use the most beautiful piece of evidence in in defending a harassment case because the HR person who wrote the note did not put her name and the date on it, so it was open to lots of questions by opposing counsel. Now, with respect to the consistency, It's easy to think of discrimination. When I was working hotline, when someone would call and say, I'm looking to terminate this employee, can we walk through the process? One of the key things I would always ask the caller was, well, what have you done in this situation in the past? So having that documentation of what you've done in the past is fantastic because it enables you to be consistent going forward. But also, if we're being consistent in how we treat employees, that's going to go a long way to defeat a claim that there's some sort of discriminatory or retaliatory motive. And it even extends to independent contractors. Think of how a person, a lot of people have raised this question on Hotline. In my experience with Hotline, you have a person who retires, they end up deciding they want to come back to work, and they're like, but I want a little bit more flexibility. Can I come back to work as a 1099 contractor instead of a W-2 employee? Now, all of a sudden, we have people doing the exact same job, but some are W-9s and some are 1099s, and that goes against the idea of consistency, and that could potentially be a red flag that the IRS would pay close attention to. So with these two key things to implement throughout your organization, documentation and consistency, those will get you a long way towards your goal of HR compliance. It's not the end-all be-all because there are so many other things like accommodations and leave management, and I could spend another 25 minutes talking about all those different things. But these are two very basic, fundamental, easy-to-apply things that will help every organization. Thank you for listening to MRA's 5-Minute HR Feed. For this episode, be sure to reference the show notes where you can sign up to connect for more podcast updates. If you have questions, you can connect with MRA's hotline team by emailing infonow@mranet.org or calling 866-474-6854. Check out other MRA episodes on your favorite podcast platform, such as MRA's 30-Minute Thrive. And as always, make sure to follow so you don't miss out. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll have another hot HR topic in 2 weeks.